Oh, hey, CNFers, the front runner, The Life of Steve Prefontaine, I know, is available for pre-order. I say that because I say it as if I'm bored of saying it because I say it at the top of every show. But then I realize not everyone listens to every single show, so I should bring the energy. I should approach it like this is the first time you've ever heard me say it. The front runner, The Life of Steve Prefontaine, is available for pre-order. I've gotten some nice notes from people who beat the shit out of that link like it owed them money. You can visit the bookseller of your choice and plunk down $32.99. Everything helps. Every author you know under the sun begs for pre-orders, and you only have so many dollars at your disposal, so I'll just say, consider it. Hey, and promotional support for the podcast is brought to you by the Power of Narrative Conference. Hold on, the Power of Narrative Conference, that's better. Celebrating its 26th year on the last weekend of March. It's like a month away, shoot. March 28th, March 29th. Hundreds of journalists from around the world are descending on Beantown, Boston. Keynote speakers include Susan Orlean, Connie Schultz, Dan Zak, Connie Chung. Yeah. Listeners to this podcast can get 15% off your enrollment fee. I don't get kickbacks. CNF15 is the code. Visit combeyond.bu.edu and use that CNF15 code. That's some serious burrito money or book money for you, the literati out there.
You don't focus on the speed, you focus on the skill, and eventually you're just going to get faster.
Oh, hey, CNFers, the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, a show where I speak to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell. I'm the goose you accidentally fed, and now he won't leave you alone. Brendan O'Mara, hey. This was the first CNF Pod live event recorded at Gratitude Brewing in Eugene, Oregon. This was a landmark moment for the show, and a step forward in the master plan for what my pal Ruby McConnell and I plan on doing to the literary scene in Eugene with the power of the podcast. I can't even say that with a straight face. Our aim is to turn Eugene into the same kind of draw Portland is. I can't say that with a straight face. So we kicked this quarterly series off with Chandlor Henderson, a writer, journalist, editor, comic book writer, filmmaker, podcaster. And I bet he bakes like a really good batch of chocolate chip cookies too. Because you know what? Because I bet he can. There are some people who can do it all, damn it. And Chandler seems to be that kind of dude. He's originally from Centerville, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. He was a bit of a nomad. He would get on buses and head to a city of his choice. And he just kind of travel about. He eventually settled in Eugene a few years ago, where he met his wife, and now he has 3 dogs, a cat, a tortoise, some fish tanks. He edits The Torch, which is the student newspaper for Lane Community College, and he's currently a student at the University of Oregon. His work has appeared in the Eugene Weekly, Business Insider, and Flux magazine, among others. He's got his irons in a lot of fires. He has many irons and many fires. Show notes to this episode more at BrendanO'Mara.com. Hey, there. You can follow my anti-social media feed, blog posts, sign up for the monthly Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter. I offer a monthly happy hour to newsletter subscribers, but when attendance is 1 or none, hey Lori, thanks for showing up, I begin to think that maybe it's not worth my time, and clearly it's not worth it for many others, though we do have some regulars who pop in, but it has been a while. If nobody shows up to the party, do you keep sending out invites? It might be time to sunset it, or move it to Patreon. Got a nice review here. The first one like a million years. This from Courtney in L.A. I hope your life wasn't too upended by wildfires. But then again, this could be Courtney in Louisiana or Los Alamos. I don't know. Great episode. 5 stars. Just listened to your discussion with Issa Adney and thought it was fantastic. You asked her a lot of good questions. Thank you. And the challenges of being a creative person with dreams or goals per your discussion. And she had such thoughtful answers. She did. I felt so grounded after listening to the conversation. Loved it. And I love that review, Courtney in LA. Thank you so much. Okay, getting back to Chandler now. Be sure to visit theblackAmericanspring.com to learn more about Chandler and to follow his various platforms. He's all over the place. So, yes, this was recorded before a live audience at Gratitude Brewing. I will share more about our second live event, which is coming in April. But in the meantime, please enjoy this conversation with the incomparable Chandlor Henderson. Riff. This being the first live event that I've ever recorded, and knowing that there's going to be tons of wrinkles to be ironed, it does us no good to wait to leap. Sometimes you got to jump before you're ready. And I wonder for you, Chandler, just in the course of your creative life, when have you had to jump before you were ready?
In general, my life's philosophy. So let me just say, before I moved to Oregon when I was 30, and I spent 20 years working in restaurants, and really every part of the restaurant: server, bartender, manager, cook, chef, dishwasher, And so in that industry, you have to kind of just do the thing, whatever the thing is. And I think when I moved to Oregon and returned to school, after I got married, I kind of that's how I approach things, with the same kind of like attack mode as I did in kitchens. So, when I'm given an opportunity to do some kind of research, or, a podcast, or, if I'm asked to, lecture to a class about my research or something, I just kind of I just do it. I look at like what is the things that need to be done, and kind of look at like what my mentors have done in relation to that thing, how they prepare, and I just do it. And I found if you're giving deep thought and attention to the thing that you're doing, it tends to work out. That could be a little bit of luck,
Sure.
or like potentially interest, because in media, like if you have an interesting topic that tends to help, if there's a little bit of wrinkles and you have an interesting topic, people might not notice the wrinkles as much.
Right.
So that's, I don't know if that answered the question, but I kind of I just prepare the best that I can, and then I just do the thing.
If you wait until you are ready, you might never start.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, it's oftentimes, even when it comes to writing, you got to write before you're ready,
Mm-hmm.
because it's only through the unfolding of that process where maybe the potholes in the road start to expose themselves, but you wouldn't know they existed until you encroached on them. So I love this idea of you just kind of got to flub your way through it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of wisdom there.
I mean, absolutely. Like the research that I'm doing, 400 Year Nightmare, when I started doing the research before I even returned to school, and I never had thought about it ever being considered academic, because that's just not what I thought about. I was like, I'm doing family research. That's it. It's for my kids. When I started looking at it academically and writing a manuscript and turning in documents and creating the graphic novel with the research, it kind of started unfolding and becoming a much larger story than I had expected. And, I had never even done research before. So I even it's like looking at drafts from, I've always written. So looking at stuff I wrote 5 years ago versus now, the research has kind of taken the same kind of growth. So the way that I approach my research now is much more detailed and organized than it would have been 5 years ago. So yeah, when I first started it, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just like, let me just try to figure out as much as I can. But now it's becoming very organized, and I'm able to share it.
Have you gotten lost in the research to the extent that it's easy to sometimes productively procrastinate in the research? Like, at what point do you feel like you need to take that leap and actually start getting work done instead of getting lost in an archive and rabbit holes, which is a fun place to get lost?
I think that has been really this year. Twice over the last 2 summers, I've gotten funding from University of Oregon to do this research. You have to create a 5-minute video of your research in the fall. So after I created that video for Cure, I kind of took a step back and started looking at all the different writings I had, all the manuscripts, all the notes, photos, videos, and organizing that. So that's kind of been, for me, the moment where I started looking at it like, okay, like you have all this research, this is good, but you really need to create the book. You need to create the book so that it can become, take on whatever life it's going to take on.
Yeah, what mode of storytelling most appeals to you?
For me, it's comic books or graphic novels for this particular topic, because I think, when you're writing something that can be tough, especially like, the Reconstruction period and the Civil Rights era, a lot of people have a hard time with that content, especially young people or people that just don't want to believe it. And so I find a graphic novel or any type of artistic way of sharing your information allows it to go further. I find it's also a good entry point for young people. A lot of this history, a lot of history in general of all types of people isn't really taught in schools. It's like history is told from the side of the victor, but it's never told. There's so many people that stories aren't told. There's, a person who, lived and died in the early 1900s, late 1800s. There might never even be a photo of them. By doing this research and learning about them and creating a graphic novel, you're not only telling their story, but you're literally bringing their representation to life for people that have been wondering about.
Yeah, and to your point about finding other avenues to learn about history, certainly history of the oppressed. When I spoke with Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, like in the introduction to an indigenous people's history of the United States, she knew that a lot of her reading and her research had to come from outside the academy. Mm-hmm. And in what way has some of the most robust learning and the best lessons that you've learned come from outside the academy and not necessarily what was maybe in a textbook from when you were in junior high or high school?
Oh man, so I'm lucky that my mother's family and my father's family both have long histories in the United States. And, I'm able to go onto the properties that, my families have been living in since the 1800s. In Florida, there's a church that was built in the early 1800s, and there's a graveyard where there's 5 generations of my family, current. There's still people that are still using this graveyard. And there's houses all around it. There's the house of my great great uncle, and my grandfather was born on this property, and there's just hundreds of years of history, and everybody's still there. So a lot of this stuff I didn't really know when I was younger. I think because my grandfather's 95. He comes from the generation of this is grown folks business, right? Like I'm not going to get all the information from him, and it's still hard for me to get information from him. But as he gets older and he knows and sees what I'm doing, he talks more. I bring my recorder, so I'm just hearing stories that I'd never heard. I think my family, they were bootleggers, and I never knew that. He's telling me stories about all the stuff that his father, my great grandfather, was doing to survive and make money during those times, and the interactions that they had with the white community, right? Because obviously back in those days. Really, Florida, where my family is still segregated, right? So, but these communities, they have to interact, and I feel like, when you think about Florida, Georgia, Alabama, which is where they are right in the Panhandle, you kind of assume, based upon the news, that these communities don't interact at all, but that's not true. They've been living there next to each other for hundreds of years, right? And so, he's telling stories about how my family would interact with, the police or with the mayors and the judges, and you would assume that based upon the history that those forces were kind of coming down on my family, but they weren't. They worked together almost against some of the more larger federal forces that could have been coming against a bootlegger. So it's really interesting to kind of hear these stories and see the properties and kind of understand maybe why people act the way that they act, which is ultimately kind of the whole point, right? For me, it's looking at the Reconstruction and looking at what people did to survive financially, and then looking at these communities currently to see how the communities function today, maybe influenced by what people were doing during the Reconstruction period.
And as someone who really loves the graphic novel and that visual interpretation as a vector for storytelling, how are you starting to storyboard it in your head?
What I've been doing is I had all these different notes and drawings, and I'll obviously would draw out the storyboard, which is the one that is public. But lately I've really been using spreadsheets, taking all of the writings and documents and photos and images and whatever, and putting them in a spreadsheet and organizing them by date and city and person. And through that process, I'm able to kind of look at what I have in one place and then kind of start storyboarding from there. You familiar with Watchmen?
Yeah. Yep.
So that comic book, the way that it was written from a storyboard is, each panel they would write just write literally, this is what I want in this panel. And if you do that, then you can go back in and start drawing what it is that you want. But each panel in Watchmen could be representing something else in time. So that's kind of how I'm doing it right now.
And what would you identify as, a particular strength that you have that you really lean on, and be it your research, your writing, just your storytelling in general, and maybe a weakness that you feel like you need to level up to your strengths?
I have no weaknesses. I'm just kidding. I think a strength that I have is, I'm not really afraid, right? Like, I think a lot of people are afraid of rejection or of somebody calling them stupid or whatever, but I'm not really. I have no fear of the idea of somebody not liking what I'm doing. Like, if you don't like it, that's unfortunate because I feel like the work I do is good. I'm 42, which is young, but I had an interesting educational journey. I didn't go straight from high school to college. Well, I did, but I didn't finish. And so I'm not maybe as strong in like the traditional academic sense, which might make it harder for me to sell my products. Like, I'm not looking at it strictly as a way to make money, which is like ultimately any type of media that you make, you have to make money for a publisher, but I'm not looking at it from that standpoint. So like, I might not be the most marketable person, but like, I'm not going to change what I'm doing to be more marketable, because generally that's not who I'm writing it for anyway,
Yeah. You talk about a somewhat atypical educational journey, and often the loudest voices in our own heads are often ourselves and our own negative talk, and whatever origin story we choose for ourselves is often the one that gets repeated over and over again. And I wonder for you, like, what is your origin story?
Oh man, that is a loaded question. My origin story. I grew up in Northern Virginia. I always loved DC. My father was in DC. I grew up in a town called Centerville, Virginia. Centerville, Virginia is very, very wealthy. It's like pretty much a picture perfect community. But my family wasn't rich. My mother got cancer when I was 11. She was given 6 months to live. She lived for 13 years. But I really kind of raised myself. I had to do everything for myself from a very, very young age. So I was always very independent. And I just always loved going to the city and listening to music and going to museums and eating food. And so, my kind of origin, I guess, is just like a nerdy black DC kid reading Shakespeare, but also I was out there like any other kid, in a city. During that time, DC was a wild place, man. There was lots of house music, lots of parties, lots of fun. It's very different. The DC that I know and the DC that a lot of people see, like, the Trump stuff, like that's not the DC that I know. Like, all the politicians, they don't live in DC. DC is a chocolate city. So I look at it like, James Brown and Chuck Brown and, Marion Barry and, that's what I see, the Black Family Reunion and, go-go music and Jordans. And I guess that's my origin story. I just was a kid who just loved black culture, loved music and food and museums and art. And I moved to Oregon, met my wife, went back to school. And one of our promises to each other is that we'd figure out a way to make our livings as artists. And so this is kind of like the next step in that.
Well, that's great. And you brought up your mother, and she passed away September 27, 2007. Is that right? And in your work and how you speak about it, you want your storytelling to really honor her legacy. So in what way do you see your work honoring your late mother?
I mean, just doing it. I remember when she passed away, because like I said, I've always written songs and poems and stories. And when she passed away, I found a notebook with stories that I'd written from like, my entire life, and stuff I'd crumpled up and thrown away. So, she always encouraged me to write and tell stories. Both my parents were singers, so I grew up in a very artistic family in that way. But, for her, it's just doing the thing that you love. My mother was an accountant, and I come from, her family's very military, very, I don't want to say conservative, but conservative is probably the best word for it. So I'm the only person in that family who really is artistic. And so, and she always encouraged it, and they were kind of like, what are you doing? Like, go work at a bank. So I think just like doing my own thing is the best way to honor her. And that's really all that she would want me to do.
Yeah. I mean, you have a real non-linear path to where you are right now. And I think there are a lot of people who might identify as kind of late bloomer types. And certainly myself. Everything seems like I liken this to, I always would look over my shoulder, and it seemed like other people were on an escalator just walking up. And I was on the opposite escalator, it was going down, and I'm walking up it. And I am just spinning my tires in that mud. And meanwhile, everyone seems to be on this rocket ship. And I wanted to just get a sense of maybe the degree to which you have looked over your shoulder or not, maybe exercise a degree of envy at seeing other people take a faster path, and maybe how you wrestle with those feelings of comparison that I think a lot of us end up feeling.
I think when I was like in my early 20s, I did, because, people were graduating high school or college, in the 21, 22. And a lot of people that I grew up with are very, very successful. So they were buying houses like right out of college. I mean, little did I know they had family help. But, at the time, you don't know that. You just say, hey, Mike bought a house. Mike bought a Mercedes. And so I would kind of like have a little bit of jealousy at that, just because I didn't understand why I didn't have those things. Because, I was always in classes, I was always one of the smart ones. I always got good grades. Like I barely without even trying, which probably like part of the reason I did not enjoy college at a young age. But I think like around when I turned 30 or so, I had been traveling a lot. Like I used to just take buses. I'd take a bus to Pittsburgh, and I'd like stay there for a couple months. I'd take a bus to New York, stay there for a couple months, take a bus somewhere else. And so I kind of just like traveled around for a long time. And when I got back to Centerville, a lot of people, were kind of jealous of me then, because I had kind of been like living a nomad life, and I wasn't kind of tied down to really anything. I was a very free spirit, which isn't a normal thing for DC kids. That's not how people live. And now that I've kind of went back to school and started writing, I get a lot of messages from people being like, that's awesome. Like, I'm watching you, I'm supporting you. And I seems like a large amount of the people who support me are back in DC. You never know if people like appreciate what you do, because it's like you do the art first, and then, you hope that people appreciate it, and back home they do. And so I wish I had more money though.
Yeah. Yeah. I was listening to a great conversation with between Debbie Millman of the Design Matters podcast and Seth Godin, who's just a brilliant author, prolific writer, speaker, entrepreneur, just a great thinker on creativity and among other things. And he had this great quote. He was telling he was in a canoe. He was paddling, and he said, you never get across the lake all at once. You get across one stroke at a time. And embedded in that is just having a confidence to be patient, to let things unfold just at the pace that they're going. But you need to just kind of just slog through. And I wonder, for you, how have you cultivated a sense of patience in your work and letting it unfold at the pace that it's going to unfold?
I think part of it is luck, almost like the luck. Like I have anxiety. We all have anxiety, right? But not having crippling anxiety in the face of like sometimes insurmountable things is luck. Just like my general disposition helps a lot. But I think also, like I said, I feel like the work is good. It's like not comparing myself to Prince at all, right? But Prince, he would take a while to put out music because he wanted it to be good. You know, it's like it takes as long as it takes. Or even, you know, when I worked in kitchens, when I was training people, they'd always ask me, like, how do I get faster? You know, how do I cook faster? How do I do things faster? I'm like, you don't focus on the speed, you focus on the skill, and eventually you're just going to get faster. And so that's kind of how I look at it. I just focus on the skill and on the content. And now it's like not even that, like organizing it in a way that it doesn't get lost in, you know, in OneDrive. And so that's kind of, I just focus on that, and that's really all that matters. Plus, I'm still in school, so I have to, I have to do that too.
Yeah, and what is a skill that you've been trying to adopt that is maybe going frustratingly slow for you?
Time management. You know, that's really that's like the boogeyman.
Mm-hmm.
Is time management, or just time in general. I just need more time. Like I need, like, you know, the day needs to be like, I don't know, 30 hours or something. That's the one.
Yeah, you're someone who seems to have like a lot of projects and like irons in a lot of different fires.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, even as writers, there's a trap of starting one thing and then getting bored with it and moving to something else and getting bored with that. And this one's just getting really hard, and I'm like, screw that. And so there's a tendency not to finish anything. Mm-hmm. So how do you, with many irons in the fire, you know, just find that extra oomph to finish something, to see something through?
I kind of work on things in different places. Like the museum work, I try to do that at the museum. Plus, it's nice there, you know, and it's quiet. The same with my research. I try to. So the McNair, we have a lounge at UO. So I try to do a lot of my research in the lounge, in the PLC. So that's like a place I can go. I can sit. I can close the door. They got a couch. I can be comfortable and put my feet up and take off my shoes and work, you know, on campus. And there's nobody there. And so that allows me to like work in a comfortable space. Cause I kind of work, I have 3 dogs. And so I tend to work, almost like in the dog pile, like we kind of lay down and I do my work. And then, you know, when I go home, I'll work on, you know, my homework or like, my editing, if I have to edit for the Torch, or, you know, I'm currently doing like a lot of work on the website, and we're bringing back the a printed newspaper. So like that stuff I tend to do at home.
When you're editing people and people who aren't as far along, you know, or as experienced as you are, what are the things that you're seeing in less experienced writers that is kind of like that's helped you and strengthened your trade as a writer?
Well, patience.
Yeah.
You know, generally an editor for a student newspaper is going to be the same age as them. You know, I'm 20 years older than them, from a completely different culture. You know, I didn't go to high school during COVID, so I didn't, you know, lose those years of socialization. And so I think I've learned to be a lot more patient by working with Gen Z. I think the one thing that I have to spend a lot of time, not have to, that I get to spend a lot of time trying to pass on the basic skills, like number one, proofread twice, and then maybe sleep on it, wake up, proofread again.
Read it aloud.
Read it out loud. So kind of like passing on those kind of skills, and then like even then like being like, hey, I did this too. Let me pull up this draft that I did from, you know, 2015, so you can see, like, I'm not just, you know, so kind of like doing that type of mentoring. Yeah, it really just those two things. But also, you know, I remember when I was 20, 21, 22, like, and a lot of times when I'm working with young students, they you know, I am busy. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think that I am nearly as busy as a 20-year-old student, because, like, you know, I go to school, I go home, and, you know, I'm not like trying to go out and be social and all this and that, you know, so it's like I'm able to just kind of like focus on the thing that I'm doing.
Yeah, well, it seems like, you know, you really honor what they have on their plates, even if you 20 years removed, it feels somewhat, if not more, like trivial to you, but you realize that there's a certain social construct that they're living under that just it's not of your world anymore. So there's an understanding there that, like, listen, you don't have the time or the bandwidth to maybe, I don't know, to do that 58th draft on something. It's it's just something. It sounds like there's an empathy coming from your direction to theirs.
Yeah. Also, one thing that I try to impart on them is, if first off, if you're submitting to, Eugene Weekly or Register Guard or whatever, any editor, they don't want to spend all of their time on the simple grammatical errors. And if you catch those before you send them to your editor, we're able to help you build the story and maybe expand upon what it is that you're writing, so it has a farther reach. And so, being able to help people do that. I'm graduating from Lane. I just finished my last class there last term, so I'll only be there for 3 more months. So it's like now it's kind of like not like there's no rush really, but trying to get the people that are there to understand, like, you're going to be doing the same exact thing I'm doing now. Maybe for, they could be there for a year, 2 years, who knows, but you might have to make some tough decisions. Somebody might be upset at you for one of your decisions, but you kind of have to, you got to do it. Yeah. And so trying to train person for that responsibility is kind of like where I'm at with it right now.
Yeah, well, and a lot of it is just so not glorious. Working in whatever medium it is, like when you actually start sitting down with it, it's like this is ugly, boring, and you get so sick of yourself over and over again. To be able to impart that kind of wisdom and experience on them is, particularly valuable. And I wonder, kind of extending that to maybe the mentors that helped you, like, turn a light on for you, like you're helping them with these very critical skills. Who are some of the people that helped, maybe turn the world from black and white into color for you and gave you those skills that, have put you on a mentor stage and put you on the path you're on?
Camilla Mortensen, Dr. Mortensen, the editor of Eugene Weekly. When I got the Google Initiative Fellowship, that kind of came about because I had a blog called The Black American Spring. I still have it. And during the 2020 protests, I was kind of going around taking photos and writing and doing interviews. And, because I'm not helicoptering into a community, I was able to interact with, Black unity and people on a completely different level. Like, I'm still friends with many of those people because I'm not coming in thinking I know better. Like, I know what's going on. I've been, protesting for many, many years, right? So that blog, started getting pretty popular. Like, I applied for the fellowship, and that blog was really my work, writing examples plus the essays that I wrote for that. And then, I got that fellowship, which the way that it works is Google pays for your employment at the publication. So I wrote for Eugene Weekly. I still actually write for Eugene Weekly. And so Camilla was kind of like, really, I wouldn't even be in journalism if it wasn't for her. Like, when I got to Eugene Weekly, I had never even taken a college level writing class. I was at Lane just taking media design classes. But, she's still my mentor. Like, she's my advisor at The Torch. I've been meeting with her every week for, at this point, like 4 years. She's one of my best friends. She's a person that means a lot to me. And then Charlie Dietz, he was the advisor at The Torch when I started the first time, and he offered me the position at The Torch right when I left Eugene Weekly. And so, like, the same, I've been working with him for many years. We go out and get coffee and dinner pretty often. And even though they both have very different styles, because, Camilla's a solutions journalist and Charlie Dietz is kind of like a Chicago style kind of, I get maybe even a Boston style journalist. They're just very, very different type of people. And they edit differently, and having both of them kind of pretty constantly, like if I write something and they like it or they don't like it, they'll tell me within, they seem to see it before anybody else does. And so they've both inspired me and kind of kept me humble a little bit. There's Dr. Rashid, who's the African-American student retention specialist at Lane. Me and him have been very close, and I've taken several of his classes, and I've gotten numerous books and lessons from him. I was a mentor in the community under GRIO, which is a program that works with Black youth in Lane. So in the Black community, I've done a lot of work. A lot of the families here know me, and it's kind of helped me become a member in that community. the thing that they've all done is because all three of them are all very different people, and they all have a very different way of approaching their work and writing and editing. But they all, the number one thing is professionalism first off, but like making sure that the thing that you're doing matters. With all the mentors that I work with, even though they're different, the common theme is making sure that the thing that you're doing matters to you and is something that you care about, because then you'll do the best work.
Yeah. And speaking of, mentors and voice, like who are some artists that you come back to time and again?
I mean, there's a few people that I really enjoy. I mean, when I was a kid, my grandfather used to watch Larry King every day. And so for me, like Larry King was like, that was like that's who I watched when I was a kid. I was like a little kid reading the Washington Post and watching Larry King, After that, it was Anthony Bourdain. I have not, after he passed, watching him, was very difficult for me. But these days, like, I can't really turn him off. Like, he's like my number one, I think, inspiration. Like, that's kind of where I want to end up. Don Lemon was, even though he made his mistakes when I was a kid, I remember reading his autobiography, and he had mentioned how he was dyslexic and he couldn't really read very well until he went into high school, and he wasn't able to pass his test because he couldn't really read very well. And so I always look at him and see like the levels of success that he has, considering how difficult it was for him to get through high school. And he's somebody that I really look up to. Obviously, Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert, because I think when you look at like The Daily Show and that type of journalism, a lot of people don't know that they have journalism degrees, and I really appreciate their ability to kind of share information in a non-conventional way. So I go back to them a lot.
The big TV influence.
Yeah, I like video a lot. I love Stephen King. I read a lot of Stephen King books. I haven't read any recently, but like hopefully I'll be able to like sit down and like read some Stephen King books again one day.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Stephen King, like a very underrated collection of his I believe it's Seasons or something. It's where Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption is, the novella of that. The name of the collection is Different Seasons. So halfway there. The novella of, The Body, which became Stand By Me and everything. It just outstanding stories. That was his attempt at trying to be like, oh, you think all I do is write horror? Like, I can really light up the page and do some really great character stuff. And my gosh, I mean, the Shawshank Redemption is just such a brilliant movie. And when you read the story, you realize so much of the dialogue in that movie is lifted just right out of his writing. So he just has such a great ear for that. And what a story, and masterfully crafted.
I remember, in an interview a long time ago, and he's been quoted at this many times. And so they were like, how are you able to put out that many books? And he's like, it's my job. I wake up, I write 9 to 5. That's what I do. And like, I kind of have always remembered that from a young person. And so I've always written really for that reason. Like most of my writings, honestly, before I kind of entered this like research space, was music, and it'd be like silly raps about like, hanging out or whatever. But I've always tried to write and kind of like keep that creative process going.
Right. Well, Chandler, as I love to bring these conversations down for a landing, I always love to end these by asking the guest, you in this case, for a recommendation of some kind. And that's just anything you're excited about that brings you joy. It doesn't have to be a book or a TV show. It could be a pair of socks or a brand of coffee. So it's whatever you like. I extend that to you, Chandler.
Obviously, Anthony Bourdain. If you guys have stopped watching him, go back and watch. His work is incredible, especially later in his life, and he's, I believe when I left this morning, he was in Lebanon, and he had to evacuate, and he just does such interesting work. But I read a lot of comic books. There's a series right now, a Captain Marvel series, that I actually have. It's in my backpack, so I can show you. But I really like that series because generally comic books have always been like, not always, but it's like, white man superhero, There's not really a lot of diversity in any way, but this particular series is nice because it's her. It's really her and She-Hulk. It's not. It's just not your traditional comic book in as far as representation is concerned. And the art's incredible, the lining's incredible. It's just modern, and I really like it.
Nice. And speaking of Bourdain, Patrick Radden Keefe has a great profile on him in the New Yorker a bunch of years ago from before he died. So that's always worth checking out. Link in the show notes. And also my buddy Bryn Jonathan Butler wrote like this 25,000 word essay on called "Giving Up the Ghost." On it is such a weird, wild essay, but Bourdain is the big jumping off point for that, and so those are things worth checking out. But so in any case, Chandler, wow, what a wonderful conversation to have. Thank you so much for the time and for sharing your brilliant insights with me and everyone here at Gratitude Brewing. So thank you so much, man.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hey,
He's a great man.
thanks everybody. I hope that you see what or hear what I hear when I listen to both of these gentlemen speak, the soulfulness and the care that they take with their craft and their approach to life in general. Let's give them another round of applause.
Pretty great, right? Yes. We did it. We did it live. I was pretty terrified that it wouldn't work out. I was real nervous. I'm finding that I don't like being up on stage and having eyeballs on me. I don't know why. The recording actually came out pretty great, but the power out to the speakers was a bit tricky, crackly, not great. It's also a pretty cavernous space, as you might imagine, at a brewery. And I was effectively the sound engineer on top of conducting the interview, so I just had a lot going on. I might need to pump up more gain from my recorder out to the speakers for the next one. Anyway, I'm going to say thanks to Jesse Springer, former guest on the show. He let me borrow his big speakers. I'm going to have to invest a good sturdy $1,000 or more. Actually, I think it'll be closer to $1,500 in a pair of those and tripods to support them, and the requisite XLR cables, yada, yada, yada. So anyway, thanks to Jesse for allowing me to borrow those speakers. But thanks to Chandler coming on the show. We did it. And thanks to the Power of Narrative Conference for promotional support. Also, pre-order the front runner. Or don't. It's up to you. Speaking of Power of Narrative, I'm hard at work on my presentation on unauthorized biography and the ethics of it. It's giving me an ulcer. Not really, but maybe. I don't have fear of public speaking, but it stresses me the fuck out. I've given a few presentations in my life, mainly at Hippocamp, and the thought of speaking in front of an audience for 45 minutes or more is daunting. The teachers and lecturers out there are probably like, that's nothing, bro. We do that 8 times a day. I know. I realize that. Which is why teaching has no appeal for me, because the thought of being in front of a group of people who, by and large, don't want to be there fills me with so much dread I can't even begin to describe it. Also, when I got feedback from my Hippocamp talks, more than a few people were asked, in their survey, would you attend another talk by this presenter? And they were like, fuck no. Well, they just said no. But I added the fuck because that's what they said in my head. And that hurts. I might retire from this shit after this summer. I don't have the riz, as the kids say. Well, then this summer, speaking of this, as if 45 minutes wasn't enough, I've got a 5-hour, that's a lot of 45-minute blocks, workshop that I need to plan on podcasting for platform purposes. 5 hours. Yeah. I'm actually kind of hoping not enough people sign up for it because I don't think I can make it interactive enough. And it would be interactive, of course. It wouldn't just be me talking for 5 hours. There'd be some tactile things to do. I'm flattered that I was invited to pitch something. It's great. Like, I'm not discounting that. But I'm already panicking about how the fuck to fill up that much time. If the numbers bear out, people don't really seem to care about podcasting that much anyway. So it's a sinking ship. So it would seem, I don't know. But we paddle our little canoe while bailing buckets of water overboard into the ocean of obscurity. Stay wild, CNFers, and if you can't do, interviews. See ya!